Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from whichever part of the world that you're watching from, and welcome to From Headlines to Heartstrings, a talk show all about connecting people to water in a warming world. Now, my name is Hajir Kubi, and I will be your host throughout this talk show. So, from me to you, a very warm welcome, whether you're tuning in online or here in the room with us in Stockholm. Now, we all know that in an age of growing aridity, climate stress, and political divides, that progress on water conservation can sometimes feel slow, it can feel complex. But we also know that water has always had another role, and that is that of connecting people. You know, it's whether it's across cultures or across geographies or even ideologies, we know that water has always had the potential to unify us as people. And that is what this talk show today is about. Today we'll explore how water can bridge divides through storytelling, through public opinion research and on-the-ground conservation work, and using specifically the Colorado River Basin as our sort of breeding ground, as our case study in this talk show. We'll look at how shared values and compelling narratives can connect people and also sort of encourage us to implement wiser policies and stronger protections for rivers everywhere. And here to have that conversation with me, I'm very delighted to be joined, first of all, by Jill Ozarski, who's a program officer at the Walton Family Foundation. Very warm welcome to you, Jill. Then we also have Sinjan Eberly, Senior Director at the Regional Communications at American Rivers. Very warm welcome to you as well. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Sarah Porterfield, Colorado River Program Director and Western Water Policy Advisor at Trout Unlimited. I would say a very warm welcome to all of you. Now, Jill, if I can start with you, maybe to start us off, can you ground us a little bit more in the Colorado River Basin? So could you tell us a bit more about where it is, why it's important, and maybe also a bit of a historical background to it, if you will?
Absolutely. So the Colorado River is really a desert river. It's in the southwestern United States. It starts as snowmelt in the high mountains of the Continental Divide of Colorado and Wyoming, and it flows all the way through 7 states and historically all the way to the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. We refer to it as one of the hardest working rivers in the world. It is one of the most engineered rivers in the world. As it flows, it also includes, besides those states and 2 countries, it also includes 30 tribal nations, flows through 11 national parks, which are some of the most iconic places in the world, like the Grand Canyon, like Arches National Park. And it also, really importantly, is the source of drinking water for 1 in 10 Americans.
Wow.
Some of the fastest growing cities in the country in the desert. And the flows of the river have already decreased by 20% over the last 20 years. They're on that same projection. And that's why this is such an important river for us all to be working on. And it also has similar and parallel issues to so many other places in the world.
Yeah, I mean that, if anything, that shows the magnitude, right, of the impact that this river specifically has. You also mentioned that it's a transnational river. Maybe regarding that, if I could go to you, Sarah, I was curious to hear from you. Can you share how sort of like this transnational sort of like character to the river, how that has also helped to connect people across borders? And I mean, we're at the World Water Week. If there's ever a platform why it's relevant to talk about sort of this sort of like the importance of transnational rivers in any sense, then it may be here. So I'd be curious to hear from you.
Yeah, so in a former life, before I did any sort of Western water policy work or worked for Trout Unlimited, my training is as a historian, and I have a PhD in the history of the Colorado River Basin. And my research focused on the transnational history of the Colorado. Yes, it flows across an international boundary from the U.S. into Mexico. And what a lot of scholarship, a lot of people haven't thought about is how this river has been the center of a transnational, international conversation for my research focused on the last 150 or so years from the late 19th century to the present. And I looked at how the National Reclamation Act policy, the National Reclamation Act of 1902 grew out of an international conversation about water management. Hoover Dam came out of the travels of a high-level government bureaucrat around the world. We think of it as this very iconic American thing, but it's actually very informed by the Panama Canal Brazil, by China, by Central Asia,
Right.
and then how whitewater rafting grew up in America, but then exported American environmentalism with it around the world. So it's been the center of this international conversation for a long time.
Yeah.
Not something that a lot of folks have recognized, but particularly, as Jill said, now, with declining flows over the past 20, 25 years, we're at a real moment of crisis in the basin, and this is the perfect venue to have conversations with other drought-stressed regions about how do we find our way through this crisis.
Yeah, precisely, and also see if we can take lessons from any other sort of like context. And sharing this is, I think, already of utmost like importance for people here also. Sinjin, if I can go to you next, just maybe to ground us off a little bit, can you tell us a bit more about American rivers? What makes it like unique in the sort of like American conservation space, but also how do you guys specifically approach the Colorado River Basin, so to say?
For sure. Well, thank you for having us, first off. American Rivers is a national river conservation organization in America. And for more than 50 years, we've been working to protect wild rivers, restore damaged rivers, and conserve clean water for people and nature. And we do that through policy actions such as the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. We also do it by physical actions like dam removals and reconnecting streams with barrier removals and floodplain restoration. And then lastly, we really pride ourselves on our creative communications and compelling storytelling, really connecting people's overarching values around water as a unifying topic, and really touching people in their hearts and how we tell those stories to engage people in the things that they care about the most, which is clean, safe, reliable drinking water.
Yeah.
And so we do that through a variety of means, whether it's filmmaking or podcasts or ESRI story maps or different ways to engage people that is more than just press releases and op-eds and like preaching, you must do this thing. It's tell them a story that they can relate to first, include them in the emotional narrative first, and then we can develop the knowledge and develop the awareness that they need in order to make good decisions about their lives. And this also applies worldwide, right? Everybody has a relationship with a place that they care about and a relationship with water that they care about. And so if we can bring all that together in a way that reminds them how connected we are to this, it's much more effective.
It's just as important to touch people's hearts as it is to touch their minds regarding the topic, so to say. That's a really good one. Because, I mean, if I take one thing away also from what you said, Sarah, then it is also that we are at pressing times when it comes to, the droughts that we see. And it's just to name one thing. So considering that urgency that you also sort of like framed out for us, if I can go to you, Jill, I was actually curious to hear, like, if we get specific about it, what are some of the most pressing, so to say, policy choices currently in front of decision makers when it comes to the Colorado River?
Well, right now, in front of decision makers, there's something being renegotiated that are the guidelines for how the river's managed. So as we've heard, this is a river that is really determined by well over 100 years of legal precedent, of history, and specifically, and especially since 1922, a compact and the subsequent law of the river that really controls how the river is allocated, is managed. But the details of how that actually works and how it's implemented are negotiated every 20 years. And it's this very wonky, complicated world of engineering and legal decisions.
I see some laughter and affirming nods on the side.
And like the first word I used was renegotiated, right? That's a word that does not come off the tongue easily to most people. But this is the process that we have, is that every 20 years, decision makers come together and make these critical decisions on how to implement that law of the river that really is going to control how that water and how that river looks and feels and is used for the next 20 years.
Wow.
And it's a long process. It's, like I mentioned, a very complicated, very legalistic process. But it is also a public process. And so a key piece of the future of the river is now how can the public and how can advocates be engaged and help support that decision, to make decisions that are going to support those decision makers, to make decisions that can really manage that river in the best possible way for all those uses that we're also dependent
Right.
on.
I mean, all those uses and all those users, so to say, because there's so many communities involved. That's actually, Sarah, I wanted to go to you for that because I was curious if you could tell us a bit more about Trout Unlimited, and specifically, I'm curious to hear more about your model and also like how you sort of work to engage different, so to say, rural communities. Because if we talk about like involvement of different stakeholders, so to say, I'd be curious to hear from your perspective how you do that.
Yeah, Trout Unlimited's mission is to bring together diverse interests to care for and recover our rivers and streams so that see if I can get this right, our children can enjoy the joy or experience the joy of wild and native trout and salmon.
Okay, cool.
I don't know much about fish. I'm not great on fish, but I know that fish need water.
Right.
And our main membership base is largely, not all, but is largely anglers, fly fisher people. But the way that we work, we have a unique business model that we are a very project-based and locally based organization.
Right.
We have staff across the United States in small communities and larger communities, but across the U.S., largely in rural communities. And our business model is based on project work. We are a very project-based organization. And it's our project managers, it's our partners in the communities. We work with federal and state agencies. We work with landowners. We work with energy companies. We work with corporations. We work with a diverse range of partners to improve the resilience and the health of the watersheds where our staff live and work.
Yeah.
And this is really, I think what's unique about that is that our staff are so embedded in their communities that they know, every one of our project managers has a list in their head of places that are priorities to improve, so that when I go to them and ask, what can we do, where should we work, they have that catalog in their head. And being able to, the fact that we do so much on the ground work then gives us that credibility to go and work on policy change, which is what I do. Those field staff, they're my boss.
Yeah.
I don't do anything that doesn't fly with them. But because of their work, I can go to Washington, D.C. and talk to lawmakers about what are the important policy changes that we need to see to improve the health of our systems and in the Colorado River Basin, improve the drought resilience for the entire system.
And by any chance, do you have some real success stories, so to say, that you could share with us when it comes to this approach of linking on the ground projects, so to say, to like larger change in that sense?
Yeah, I have a few examples. The first one I'll talk about is a program called the System Conservation Pilot Program, and it's a program that's been around since about started in 2015. We've been involved since the beginning. And this is a program that's designed to test the willingness of landowners, municipalities, et cetera. We work mostly with farmers and ranchers on this program to participate in temporary, voluntary, and compensated, those three words are very important, reductions in consumptive water use. So for example, we've worked with a number of farmers and ranchers on fallowing their fields for whole or partial seasons in order to conserve water for the health of the broader system. This was a pretty small program when it started. Through our relationships and others, it's not just us, of course. We always have partners, and there's other folks working on this as well. But we have been able to help continue that program, grow support for it, and help to prove out that this is a really viable program to reduce consumptive water use.
Okay.
With the hope, we're working on reauthorization of the program right now, but with the hope that this can build out into a durable program long term that can help with that consumptive water use reduction.
Great. Yeah, that's I think already one that really sort of showcases how that works. I mean, a different way that we spoke of earlier, a different approach, so to say, to advocate for more action there, that is storytelling. Sinjin, you spoke to it briefly. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit? So do you have any concrete examples of storytelling work that has helped connect people to the river?
Oh, for sure. Over the last 10 years or so, American Rivers has made well over 30 films. Short films, mostly that are available online in the digital format, but from all across, mostly the Colorado River Basin, but across the country as well. And a lot of them, we want to do these films with a purpose as well. So introducing a character, introducing a landscape that people may not be familiar with, but then making sure that there's always an action attached to it. And, the perspective has been draw people in with that emotional narrative of the film itself, and then wrap all the knowledge that we hope to get out, all the advocacy or all of the, all the awareness that we're hoping to gain in order to advance a policy description that, would be good for rivers from a policy perspective into everything else that is associated with that film or podcast or story map or whatever.
Yeah.
We've highlighted areas like the Grand Canyon. We've highlighted areas like in the Upper Colorado region with the rancher who now has become a real voice for rivers in Colorado and the Upper Basin,
That's amazing.
the northern part of the Colorado River Basin, and just making those connections and developing those stories around these people that people can relate to.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, well, if we treated the river better, these ranchers would have a greater opportunity to be more viable and have a longer heritage and all the things that really matter.
And would you say that the sparking of that inspiration, so to say, is that what sort of drives policy action and also afterwards? Is that how you sort of target it? Or
yeah, it certainly doesn't help. It certainly doesn't hurt.
Right.
I mean, we can hammer away at policy documents and spreadsheets all day long, but if we really want to bring the public along, we have to give them something that they can relate to, and that in their minds goes, oh yeah, I want to live like that, or I want an identity like that.
Right.
And we use a lot of primary marketing research too to kind of validate where are people's minds in terms of some of these issues, and then how can we attract them, meet them where they are, attract them into, the kinds of change we want to make with the world, and then move from there.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Jill, if I can go to you next. I mean, one thing that's very clear to me is sort of like, we've spoken about the magnitude of this river a couple of times, right? I mean, it really stretches far, as we said, both in uses and users, but there's so many different stakeholders also on the one hand. So I was curious to hear from you, in such a complex basin, so to say, how do you make sure that all those different stakeholders also stay coordinated and organized in that sense with each other?
Well, the Walton Family Foundation has been funding work in the river for well over 10 years now. And a lot of those organizations that are, and we fund NGOs that are working on the ground or working on policy or are coming up with the creative, innovative ideas of how to do things better, right? And in order to make that the most effective, we also fund infrastructure, meaning people and resources, so that those groups can work well together, communicate with each other, strategize with each other, so that you get the best strengths of each group. I mean, you have two examples here of organizations that do different things, but they have the same goal of a better river overall.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is just two examples. There's other organizations that the Walton Family Foundation funds that are part of a communicated network of organizations that can share resources, can share expertise, can keep talking and strategizing and working out issues amongst themselves, so that the sum of the parts is greater than if everyone was working independently.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important role as a funder to support not just those individual groups, but also the infrastructure to keep those individual groups working together.
Right.
And it's that together and that collaboration that is going to get us to where we need to go.
Right, so the mechanisms of coordination in that sense that you manage. I mean, different groups, I mean, we already said it's a transnational river, but you also mentioned at the very beginning 30 tribal nations. I mean, we're talking about foundations, NGOs, local partners. Sarah, if I can go to you specifically zooming in on NGOs, how would you say that, we should best work together with NGOs, or what do you see sort of as the role of NGOs in the basin?
Yeah, I think that, Jill touched on this, that we have our individual strengths, but I think that what NGOs do that's different than other interests, in particular states or the upper basin, lower basin, which is the political division in the Colorado, water users. NGOs are able to step back and see the river as a whole and think about the health of the system as a whole, right? We can go from the very local working on Muddy Creek, doing nature-based solution kind of work TU does with other partners in Wyoming, from that hyper-local to how zooming out and seeing not just how is this going to support the health of this part of the basin, but how does this support the health of the river as a whole? And I think that's something that all of our organizations bring, is let's step back and see this system as a whole, because that's what we're supporting. We're not, supporting just one state or just one user, and they all have those roles to play, but we can see that whole system.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's sort of like putting all those pieces together, having all those different perspectives from all these different actors, so to say, that makes it work as a whole. So one thing I take from you guys is the importance importance of collaboration. So I wanted to ask you very briefly as a final question to each of you. I mean, everyone listening here with us in the room in Stockholm, or whether the people are watching online and they're listening to this later, what is your one message that you hope that they also take away from their sort of this story, but also in their role that they can sort of like enact and have in protecting the Colorado River Basin? So Sarah, could I start with you very briefly?
Yeah, I think that, local action matters. From, we work with volunteers across the country and have hundreds of thousands of volunteer hours per year. And, those folks, similar to what Sinjin's saying about storytelling, they are touching their local watershed. I walked to a project site 2 blocks from my house the other day to help plant trees. Yeah. And, with that local, getting your hands dirty
so
on
getting
the
into
projects.
contact with local actors in that sense is what you're saying.
And then knowing this is part of the whole system.
Right. Thanks. Jill?
Collaboration matters.
Right.
And it's when we all are working together and working to understand one another's perspective is where the power of change really happens.
Yeah, that's great. Sinjin, finally?
The water unifies and water connects everyone. Whether on which side of the political divide you're on, no matter what your ideologies are or religion or whatever, water connects all of us. And keeping in mind the importance of that connection is what really keeps us connected and can drive us all forwards to real solutions for each other, which I think is really important.
Yeah. I would have nothing to add to that. So I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank everyone in the room here in Stockholm with us for being here. And to all those of you watching online, thank you so much. And I would say, let's keep spreading this message forward.